Alright, this will be a video about 5 1980s movies that are based on real life conspiracies and mysteries. So these aren't like the best 1980s movies or my favorites. This video will focus more on the real life conspiracy theories, if you want to use that term, or the real life mysteries that these movies are based on, because a lot of times the stories these movies are based on are just a million times more interesting than the actual movies. I already did two top 10 lists of 1970s movies similar to this video. I'll link these in the description. Now I'm moving on to the 80s and we'll get into it. And first up is Hangar 18 from 1980. This is about a UFO that crashes in Arizona. Then this UFO is taken to a mysterious Hangar 18 at an Air Force base to be studied. The military discovers alien beings on board the craft, and the government attempts to cover it all up while another group tries to expose it. And this is based on a real life mystery because Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio is rumored to be a real place where crashed UFOs and alien bodies are sent to be studied. And what exactly is stored in Wright-Patterson's Hangar 18 is really one of the just great mysteries in the UFO realm. There are just a ton of rumors about it. There's rumors that the UFOs from the Roswell crash were sent there, rumors that alien bodies are stored there. And one of the reasons the mystery around Hangar 18 became so popular was that Barry Goldwater, who ran for president in 1964, and he was an Arizona senator for a long time, he was famously interested in Hangar 18, and he tried repeatedly to get access to the hangar, and he was denied.
But I think that at Wright-Patterson Field, if you could get into certain places, you'd find out what the Air Force and the government knows about UFOs. Reportedly, a spaceship landed. It was all hushed up, quieted, and nobody have never heard about much of it. I called Curtis LeMay and I said, General, I know we have a room at Wright-Patterson where you put all this secret stuff. Could I go in there? I've never heard him get mad, but he got madder than hell at me, cussed me out, said, don't ever ask me that question again.
And the story of how all these rumors around Hangar 18 got started is kind of filled with mystery, just like the hangar. A lot of times these rumors are attributed to Robert Spencer Carr, who wrote a lot about UFOs in the 1970s, and he talked about a Hangar 18 that housed alien bodies. But there was also a researcher named Jim Moseley who talked about it. He was a prominent UFO researcher during the 1950s and 60s, and he equal parts believed and debunked UFO stories, basically claimed that he had an open mind, but he was also a skeptic. And in the mid 1950s, Jim Moseley met a lady he referred to as Ms. Y, who claimed to work on the teletype machine at a military base in Ohio. She had a very high security clearance and she would send classified messages. And she claimed that she'd seen a photographer coworker of hers developing photos of a flying saucer that was stored in a secret room at the base. And Jim Moseley claimed that this Miss Y was the real deal. He talked to others who confirmed that she did work at the base with access to sensitive information, and she talked about a red and white aircraft attack alert that the base had been placed under for a 2-week stretch, which Jim Moseley also confirmed did happen. And Miss White claimed the alert was placed because this UFO had a device on it that would give off a beeping noise, which the military believed was a help signal being sent out. So they placed the base under this attack alert because they thought they might be attacked by UFOs. So Jim Moseley wrote about this story years later, and this is one of the things that just really kicked off all the rumors about Hangar 18 and UFOs being stored there, and it just really took on a life of its own from there. Like I said, there are just so many rumors about what's being hidden there. This book here, MJ12 and the Riddle of Hangar 18, compiles a lot of the rumors. There's the Roswell crash. There's been a lot of reports of UFOs being seen around the base over the years, and many have claimed that there's a blue room at Hangar 18 that is this ultra secret area that's underneath the hangar, which is where the really secret stuff is hidden. Probably not surprisingly, the Air Force denies that Hangar 18 even exists, but that hasn't stopped people from speculating about it, and this Hangar 18 movie from 1980 is one of the reasons that there has always been such interest in this hangar. Next up is Ghostbusters from 1984. Everybody knows this movie, and Ghostbusters has a ton in common with something called the UCLA Parapsychology Lab, which is such an interesting story. So, the UCLA Parapsychology Lab was a group of professors and researchers who taught classes on parapsychology and telepathy in the 1960s and 70s at UCLA. They would even perform ESP experiments on student volunteers, and it was extremely popular. A description of one of the classes said the lecture hall of 500 people was standing room only because so many students attended. So, it is just crazy to me that there was this group on a major college campus like UCLA that taught classes on ESP and things like that. And if you've seen Ghostbusters, you'll know that they too are college professors who work in the parapsychology department at Columbia and use student volunteers for experiments. And then they start up the Ghostbusters because their college closes their department. But the biggest similarity between Ghostbusters and the UCLA lab has to do with investigating haunted houses and ghosts. Instructors at the UCLA Parapsychology Lab investigated a reported 500 ghost hauntings over the course of a few years. So they did more than just teach classes on the paranormal. The most famous case they investigated was the Culver City Poltergeist, which is a pretty well known haunting case in LA, and it was the inspiration for the movie The Entity. A lady named Doris Byther claimed her house was haunted and that she'd even been sexually assaulted by a ghost. And the UCLA team who looked into this claimed they witnessed things like pots and pans flying across the room, floating green lights, and they even said that when her teenage son played a Black Sabbath album, his baseball cards would fly all around the room. They eventually came to believe that Doris Byther herself was the source of the haunting, not the house, and this Culver City poltergeist story became just one of the best known haunting cases in the history of Los Angeles, and it brought a lot of attention to this UCLA team who was investigating ghosts and hauntings and things like that. And Dan Aykroyd, who wrote Ghostbusters, he has just a wild history with ghosts and the paranormal. His grandfather used radios to talk to the dead. His great grandfather was a spiritualist. And he wrote a book about the history of ghosts with his father. So his family has just a long history with ghosts, which it said that this was also an inspiration for him when he wrote Ghostbusters. And next up, we have Society. Shout out to one of my followers who commented about this one on my last movies video. This movie is just bonkers. It is a straight up awesome 80s horror movie. It's about a high schooler in Beverly Hills who discovers that his parents, who are just normal everyday people, they're actually part of a secret society involved in cannibalism and orgies and rituals and a whole bunch of wild stuff. And he tries to expose this society only to discover that everybody he turns to is involved with this secret cult as well. So it's similar to Eyes Wide Shut, but it's not nearly as well known. And it's probably not a surprise to many watching this that secret societies like this not only exist, but they're most likely very prevalent. There's this pretty well known party hosted by the Rothschilds in the 1970s, which is just the weirdest party ever. There's all these bizarre photos from the party out there on the internet. The poster for Society is actually very similar to a lot of these photos, so you do wonder if the creators of the film might have gotten their inspiration from this party. And something else this movie really reminds me of is the Starchild message board thread, which I did a video on a while back. This message board thread is one of the most fascinating things I've ever read. It was a thread from 2009 where this poster, who went by the handle Starchild, claimed that he was the child of a famous movie star, Starchild, and he made all these posts about how evil Hollywood was behind the scenes, how there were all these satanic parties with rituals, and how he'd been forced to be a part of these rituals. He'd had his soul sacrificed. It really gets into some wild stuff. But he talks about how his father is a respected actor. He appears on TV shows and movies, and from the outside, he's seemingly normal, but he had a dark side and he was deeply into Satanism. And Starchild claimed that many others in Hollywood were deeply into it as well. And other people in the thread started talking about their experiences with the same things. People posted about parties they'd been to where they'd witnessed some really disturbing things. One person talked about her friend, who was the daughter of a successful New York City architect, who was just a normal guy on the outside, but he was involved in a secret society where he'd forced his daughter into rituals and things like that. So the world that's described in the Starchild thread is really similar to what's shown in Society. And this movie gets even crazier than that. I won't spoil the ending, but I definitely recommend checking it out. I really enjoyed it. Next up is The Firm, which actually kind of ties into something else that's talked about in the Starchild thread a lot, and that is blackmail. So in this movie, Tom Cruise gets a job at a very prestigious law firm, and the firm gives him all these perks. They give him a house, a car, trips where the hotels are paid for by the firm. And Tom Cruise starts to uncover that the law firm is owned by the mob and involved in money laundering and a bunch of illegal stuff for the mob. So he decides that he wants to get out, maybe expose some of this illegal stuff, but the firm tells him, no, 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 don't even think about it because everything that we've given you has been wired for video and audio. His home had hidden cameras in it, his hotel rooms did too. They caught him with a girl who wasn't his wife, so they have all this blackmail material on him that they'll release if he tries to get out. And everyone else at the firm has been blackmailed in a similar way. They show him employees who've been murdered in the past who tried to get out. So, blackmail plays a big part in the movie's plot, and blackmail is a very common thing in the real world, politics, Hollywood, just everywhere. It's a recurring theme in so many videos I do. Watergate, the Vicky Morgan scandal from the 80s, recently the Epstein operation just seems like, in part, it was just one giant blackmail scheme. And the Starchild thread I talked about really gets into blackmail in Hollywood and just how prevalent it is. The Starchild thread initially started because a guy made a post claiming that he worked for MTV and he'd helped set up hidden cameras in the house that was given to Nick Lachey and Jessica Simpson for their TV show Newlyweds. The whole house was rigged with hidden cameras that they didn't know about, and this had been done to capture material that could be used to blackmail them. So what he describes in his post is basically identical to what's done to Tom Cruise and the firm. There were a bunch of other people who posted in the Starchild thread who talked about blackmail and how once you start to make a name for yourself, you're given all this free stuff, invited to all these parties. But the parties are bugged, the free cars and the free hotel rooms are bugged, and it's all done to get anything that can be used to blackmail these people because the people in power want to have something to threaten people with if they ever decide to expose anything illegal or morally wrong that they've witnessed. So I did think it was interesting how the firm basically shows exactly this and how someone can be entrapped in a blackmail operation. Next up is Robocop, and personally, this is just a top three movie of all time for me. This movie just kicks so much ass, and everybody probably knows the plot of this one too. A Detroit police officer is nearly murdered, and then he's turned into a cyborg cop. So obviously, there's a lot you could talk about here with robotics, but I wanted to focus this on the company that builds Robocop, OCP, Omni Consumer Products. OCP is just this giant, heartless mega corporation who invests in prisons, healthcare, weaponry, space exploration, just a whole bunch of stuff. And there's a company named Wackenhut who's been called the real life OCP. And Wackenhut is such a fascinating company. I've talked about it in a few videos. Like OCP, Wackenhut was this huge corporation who was a government contractor. They developed weapons and performed surveillance. They owned a bunch of private prisons, and they were involved in a lot of shady stuff. As this FBI agent said here, it is well known in the industry that if you want a dirty job done, call Wackenhut. There were a bunch of former military officers who worked for Wackenhut, and they provided security to just a ton of top secret government installations, most notably at Area 51. The infamous camo dudes who patrol Area 51 for trespassers are Wackenhut employees. Wackenhut also had just a massive team of private investigators. It was claimed at one point Wackenhut had a file on 2.5 million Americans, which was one out of every 46 Americans in the country at the time. So that is just nuts to think about how big this intelligence network of theirs was. They also played a big part in the Inslaw Promise software scandal and potentially were even involved in the murder of Danny Casolaro, which is just a massive mystery. So Wackenhut was involved in just a bunch of stuff, and one of the more interesting stories about Wackenhut ties in with OCP and Robocop. So in Robocop, OCP has privatized the Detroit police force. So the police all work for OCP. The city of Detroit has sold the police department to OCP. And in the late 1960s, Wackenhut was hired by the state of Florida to provide a private police force for the state. They were termed Wacken Cops, and it was very controversial because these weren't actual police officers. These were just private Wackenhut employees who were given all this power by the state of Florida to investigate citizens and have access to police files on citizens. This police force was funded by outside contributors, but no one really knew who was actually funding them. So it was thought that these whacking cops could be paid to target certain people like political enemies or people who were protesting the government. And there was so much opposition to privatizing the police force like this that the program was ended after a year. but it's pretty disturbing to think about what might have happened had this not ended. Wackenhut could have expanded their private police force into other cities, so it really could have become just this like New World Order surveillance state type stuff. Claude Kirk was the governor of Florida when this happened. I did a video about him, and he is just one of the most fascinating governors of all time. He was married to Erika Kirk back in the 1960s, and Erika Kirk bears a striking resemblance to the modern Erika Kirk. So that's a real fun little mystery if you haven't seen those videos that I did. But Wackenhut definitely has a lot in common with OCP and Robocop, and Robocop just absolutely perfectly depicts this big government contractor and just how ruthless and powerful they can be. So there you have it. That's the real conspiracies behind five 1980s movies. This was going to be a top 10 list, but it was getting just a little too long. So I figured I'd break it up. I should have another video similar to this one posting with five more 1980s movies. Should be posting that very shortly, so be on the lookout for that. And then lastly, thanks as always to the members here on YouTube and the supporters on Patreon. You guys are awesome, and I just really appreciate the support. Truly means a lot. So thanks again. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you soon with another one.